This is Keys to the Shop, episode 449, Exploring Convenience and Automation with Tim Cox of Franke Coffee Systems. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Please do subscribe to the show. Follow along as new episodes come out. It makes a huge difference, keeps you updated. Share these episodes also on social media. Lots of coffee shops, roasteries, and professionals around the world still don't know about Keys to the Shop. And by sharing it, you get to introduce them to the wide array of topics and conversations that Keys to the Shop has collected over 7 years. So thank you so much, everybody. And I want to let you know that the key holder coaching groups, that's the peer-to-peer mastermind groups with coffee shop owners, is getting ready to open up. That is coming up in about around February. We're going to open it up for more groups. The current inaugural group is halfway done. It's going so fast, but everything is so awesome in that group. And I love seeing the progress that the members of the key holder coaching group are making. It's really amazing to see accountability, encouragement, solutions, all taking place between coffee shop owners. And if you're an operator, an owner who wants to take advantage of that and apply to be a part of the key holder coaching groups launching in March of this coming year. And so again, that email for key holder coaching groups, chris@keystotheshop.com. So when it comes to technology and coffee, one of the pieces of tech that I'm so excited about is the Ground Control Brewer. It brings next level extraction technology to your cafe, makes the best batch brew coffee you've ever had, and also allows users to make tea, batch iced lattes, and cold brew. You can find more information at groundcontrol.coffee. Their new brewer is 45% less cost than the original Cyclops brewer with the early bird special pricing, and it's much shorter. It's 24 inches high, so it's versatile in terms of where you put it in the cafe, and it has 30% higher volume for batch espresso and cold brew concentrate. And on top of all of that, it's cloud connected to the smart dispenser that tracks all your brewing data. So concentrates for iced lattes, 8-minute cold brew, best batch brew coffee possible. This is a clear winner for your cafe. Go ahead and check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. Crafting beverages comes from using products that we can be proud of. And beverages such as the Barista series from Pacific has been specifically crafted for baristas and approved by baristas all over the world. There's so much intention brought into the process of creating this full range of plant-based beverages for your cafe. It stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome texture for latte art, and is so balanced with your drinks. It keeps the focus on the coffee. So check them out at pacificfoodservice.com. Get samples and try it for yourself. I believe you and your customers are going to love this product. If you're looking for the best plant-based beverages to serve your guests, then consider the Barista series from Pacific. All right, everybody. Well, today we are going to be bringing back a past guest on the show, Tim Cox. Now, Tim was a guest way back in the day, in the first couple of years of the show, back in episode 115, about finding success in mobile coffee. His career has taken him across the industry in lots of different roles since then. And today, as we bring Tim back onto the show, we're going to be focusing on technology, convenience, and automation. Currently, Tim is the marketing manager for Franke Coffee Systems. He is a food and beverage professional. He has over 15 years of experience focusing on beverages and specialty coffee. And his career, like I mentioned, spans a lot of diverse roles, ranging from multi-unit retail management, restaurant ownership, product development for national brands, and marketing. Tim has developed his experience across multiple channels, including specialty, QSR, and convenience. So his role at Franke Coffee Systems is all about being responsible for research and insights, as well as product management. In this conversation with Tim, we get to talk all about his entry into this world of automation and convenience as somebody who was also formerly with 7-Eleven. And the conversation really ranges around how we should be viewing different segments of the market that we in specialty coffee have kind of forgotten about. what technology does to bring coffee to more people and why it's a good thing to have automations and convenience in the market, and maybe some of the ways that we can adjust our thinking as specialty coffee people to broaden our reach. And this is something that's really fun for me because I, as you might know, tend to have some pushback towards automation and tech and AI and stuff like that. And Tim always challenges me with his perspective. And, we get into some conversations in the comments on LinkedIn. And so I'm glad to bring Tim on the show to have this conversation for your sake. And so we can bring these ideas to the forefront and wrestle with them, because automation and convenience is not slowing down. And how we view it is going to help us view our customers in a charitable way, in a complete way, rather than creating animosity towards these things without reason and having it bleed over into how we view people. So that's especially something that I'm excited about presenting to you in this conversation. So let's get right to it. No more talking from me. Here now is my conversation about automation and convenience in coffee with Tim Cox of Franke Coffee Systems. All right, Tim, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. It's been a bit. Glad to have you back here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's hard to believe it. It's been maybe 5 years.
It has, yeah. You were like one of the early guests on the show. Thank you for being here again. And you've been quite busy, and your career has taken many twists and turns in the course of 5 years. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, you started to go into the world of some pretty high up corporations in coffee from where you were originally. So talk to us a little bit about this transition that you made over the course of these 5 years.
I was in coffee for maybe 10 years before that, 5 years, and kind of in the context of smaller specialty roasteries, and then had the opportunity to open a cafe in the Dallas area. I think when we last spoke, I was operating the cafe and doing some catering. And then things kind of took quite the turn after that. And I ended up helping lead the coffee programs for 7-Eleven for a couple of years. So really was playing in a different ballpark, if not just playing a different game at that point. And really learned a lot. At that time, I was a customer of the company I'm working for now, which is Franke Coffee Systems. In between, I was doing some distribution, which was another new thing for me. I was working for a regional distributor that sold Allied products in North Texas. And then about 6 months ago, relocated to Central Tennessee and working with Franke Coffee now. So we do super automated bean to cup and espresso solutions. Definitely a variety of things that in my younger barista days, I probably wouldn't have expected to see myself doing, but it's been a lot of fun along the way.
All right. So let me push into that a little bit, I guess, and say the younger version of Tim wouldn't have seen himself doing the stuff that you're doing today. And I feel like there's a lot of people in the industry that would be like, yeah, that is interesting, that pivot, because you wouldn't hear somebody today say, like, one day I really hope I'm going to work for 7-Eleven or start to really, promote super automatic espresso machines. Maybe today more often. But what changed? What was this change made in Tim?
I mean, for me, it was really just the opportunity to impact, more cups at scale for more people. And I think that there's something exciting in elevating coffee in spaces where you wouldn't maybe necessarily always expect to find quality coffee. I think we kind of get siloed from the specialty coffee perspective at times and forget that it's actually a relatively small space within the industry. So there was something really attractive to me in that. And I think I'd started to kind of go down the automation rabbit hole a little before that. So while those experiences certainly accelerated that interest within me, in retrospect, I think maybe the journey isn't as unusual as I might have thought that it was before I went on it.
A lot more similarities in a broad sense between what you do now and what you were doing in the narrower specialty coffee niche that was the small cafe, the classic espresso machines and that kind of thing. So you're seeing a little bit more similarity between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the market's evolved a little bit throughout those years too, aside from my own evolution. And so I wouldn't be able to do what I do today without my previous experiences. And I think it's just been a really interesting trajectory, and it's been fun, selfishly, to have taken the path that I have.
I mean, it's a different ecosystem. You said maybe they're playing a completely different game than we are, but it's a coffee, and you're right that specialty is this narrow portion of what coffee is globally. I'm struck by the idea of influencing more cups of coffee. That would assume that there is some connection between the way that people view coffee in those circles, which I think largely we've said that's different and separate, that there's a connection between that and what actually happens in the market and how it affects how specialty is perceived. Even if we don't think our customers are gas station convenience store customers, maybe there's a lot more crossover than we think. What's the connection where influencing something in that scale actually makes a difference at this smaller range of specialty?
Well, I think there's probably at the end of the day more overlap from a customer perspective than might be expected from a lot of folks. I mean, people that go to specialty cafes get gas, and sometimes they're tired in the morning and sometimes they're on road trips. And I think a higher proportion of customers that frequent specialty cafes probably frequent some of these other less specialty venues as well. But at the end of the day, I think that a rising tide lifts all ships, and that as quality is elevated within some of these other segments, people get accustomed to a higher level of quality, and that makes them care more. It makes them think about it more, and it makes them more primed to potentially convert to that specialty cafe experience. So, I think that there is definitely overlap with those segments of the Venn diagram. And at the end of the day, I think that whatever somebody's favorite coffee is, whether it comes from a C store or whether it comes from a cafe or a bakery or wherever they're getting it, if it's their favorite, then it's what's good to them. And I think that that's something that's just kind of important not to lose sight of.
One of the things about specialty, and maybe you can help define specialty for us because I think we're using that term and maybe we're all kind of defining it differently. But it does seem like at a larger scale, we have this assumption that we're going to increase in ethical dilemmas around price and practices and quality. So, from your perspective, define specialty for us as you define it today, and maybe address some of those concerns I think that people just automatically assume are there.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of defining specialty, I think like within specialty coffee, we worry about it too much. And I think sometimes it kind of becomes inside baseball to a degree. I mean, I know earlier in my career, I cared a lot about just the tiniest incremental progressions in quality. And I think those can really tend to have diminishing return at a point. I was reading recently about how batteries charge. And, at the beginning, there's all of these electrical signals, or, protons, whatever. They're flying around in this battery, and there's a lot of space for them to land. And then as they get incrementally more full, there's less space for them to land. And the charge becomes less and less effective. And so, like what I read said, it will take as long to charge the last 20% of the battery as the first 80%. And I think that we focus so much on that 20% range of these incremental gains in espresso quality. And like this, we act as if our customers on average can taste the difference in a half point of extraction. And I think at the end of the day, they don't. So, while I used to spend time explaining to customers at my cafe the definition of specialty coffee and everything like that, like I'm at a point where I just don't think I really care what the definition is. I mean, I'm still unsure about maybe the value of like a super broad definition, like some of the new SCA definitions of things. But as I said earlier, I think at the end of the day, what the person drinking the coffee thinks is good is good. And if the farmer made money on selling that coffee and the customer is happy with drinking that coffee, then to me, that's really what matters. I think as baristas and coffee people, we can kind of get into a gatekeepery kind of mentality. Sometimes there's the snobby barista stereotype for a reason, and there's value in meeting the customer where they're at, and there's more value in making it about the customer and not about ourselves. I've had people tell me that it's our job to educate the customer on what's good. And I just think that that is simply not true, and that it's our job to listen to the communities that we're serving and to serve them well. I think that doesn't just make for a viable business model, but it makes us better stewards of the industry and all the actors that participate in making it special. And then I think to your point about ethical concerns, I mean, when I went into the convenience space, I got called a sellout by a lot of people that I'd known for a long time in coffee. And in my perspective, I think that's just the wrong attitude, and that it's kind of missing the forest for the trees in a way. And I think that, working in specialty cafes and roasteries, it was enjoyable to buy and sell good coffee. But, most of the spaces I was operating within, they were going to have good coffee regardless. And so, back to what I said, the ability to just impact that many cups for that many customers, I think, was a more valuable experience for me. And at the end of the day, I've heard baristas say things to customers like, if a farmer saw you putting vanilla syrup in that pour over that I gave you, they would cry, or something ridiculous like that. And I think at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of specialty buyers who talk nonstop about the work that they're doing to help farmers, and then they still nickel and dime their importers on price, or they buy the super small experimentally processed lots that were probably already cost prohibitive for the farmer to produce. And then it's like, good luck selling your 80-point lots. And so, at the end of the day, what's more impactful to the farmer? Is it that scenario, or is it saying I can buy your entire production? So, I mean, you can argue that the coffee being bought and sold on the commodity market isn't ideal. And I think that there's a case to be made there. But at the end of the day, the C market also provides liquidity and opportunity for market access for thousands of farmers that may have not otherwise had it. And so, not to say that there's not progress that we can make there, because there certainly is. But at the end of the day, farmers selling more coffee versus less coffee, all other things relative, is still a better situation to me. So I haven't found myself in a situation where I felt that the ethical concerns at scale were really more problematic than things at a smaller scale. It's the same challenges and the same issues. It's in a different context. And we discussed a little bit about how specialty is a small part of the market at the end of the day. And I think just helping more farmers sell more of their coffee, like, that's a win either way.
When we talk about a customer interacting with a bottle of coffee, like a ready to drink product or a convenience product, where it's an afterthought, and we also then compare that against the onslaught of really social initiative driven coffee sales and specialty, that contrast feels like that's the biggest insult, and that we generally value the informed purchase rather than the convenient purchase. But it feels like what you're driving at here is that the scale and the utility of the coffee itself is perhaps more valuable than the customer getting it, so to speak, or really being passionate about their coffee. Like, do we need people to be passionate about their coffee, or do we just need them to buy coffee? Is there much of a difference, really?
I think at the end of the day, we need people to buy coffee. I'm not saying that to say that I don't think there's value in people caring more about progressing the way that we operate within the industry and doing things better, because I think that there is. But I think that if we try to project that desire across the market en masse, that we're probably not going to make as meaningful of steps as if we focus on doing things right where we can. And there's a lot of brands that do things like that really well, that do things transparently, and that really do genuinely make the effort to provide more value backwards through the supply chain. There's also a lot of greenwashing in coffee, where I think that it's confusing for consumers, because they see brands making these claims, and then maybe they're behaving another way behind the scenes. And so, in that way, things kind of get obscured to a degree. I think the important thing really is to keep people drinking coffee and making these incremental gains. Like, as we see coffee get better across segments, and even to your point of RTDs, like, there's some really good RTDs now. As the benchmarks for quality rise, I think that trickles throughout the industry, and over time, more people do get it and more people do care. I don't think that we can necessarily force it, and I don't think that's really different than any other industry. And I think, especially, in a time like right now, where there's uncertain economic times ahead, perhaps, or people are kind of feeling the inflationary pressures and things like that. A lot of the data I read, people score these like sustainability metrics super high, but then when you look at their purchasing behaviors, there's actually like really a disconnect there, and they're not actually, even the people that are vocalizing that these things are really important actually aren't even themselves purchasing that way. So I think that it's really complex, and that it goes beyond, is it more important for people to just drink coffee or for people to care? I think it's important for people to care, but to get them to the point where they're going to care, they have to be drinking and enjoying coffee and coming back to do it again.
Right. So, what should we be paying attention to in the market of convenience and commodity and the areas where we kind of would feel, embarrassed to like, oh, I'm drinking a French vanilla latte from a machine in a gas station, which, if we're honest with ourselves, that, for what it is, might taste delicious. Is it the pinky up specialty experience that we think we should always be drinking? No, not necessarily. But what are we missing here? What are the demographics that we're ignoring to our own hurt, if you will?
I think that we forget about or ignore pretty much everyone, if I'm being honest. I mean, like I kind of indicated earlier, I think a lot of specialty operators act as if they assume everybody that walks through their door is a Q grader. And that's just not reality. I think that we should train our staff well. I think that we should be the masters of our craft. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that we're serving our customers. We aren't just serving ourselves and our barista friends. I think we kind of frame our own biases often in the context of these altruistic things like helping the farmers and the integrity of the product, when sometimes it comes more down to personal ego, perhaps. And so, in terms of who are we forgetting about and who are we focusing on? I mean, every business operates within a community, and that's not different if it's a boutique specialty shop or if it's a C store or if it's a QSR. And I think what's important is to understand the communities that we're serving, to listen to them, because I think more often than not, they do a pretty good job of informing us of their desired experiences. And I think people do want quality, and I think that they can recognize that, and they also want convenience, and that doesn't just have to mean a C store. I think people live fast paced lives. I think COVID accelerated a lot of things. Just businesses had to adapt out of necessity. And, I see in the reports, kind of looking back from 2019 year over year to today, that the expectations for things like drive throughs, things like speed of service and accuracy are increasing a lot for customer desire. While, things like just strictly focusing on quality probably matters to the same proportion of people that it did. And I think quality just like organically rises over time, because trends go, they trickle down, they trickle up. But in terms of demographics that we're missing, I think it's just non-coffee people, and that is irrespective of the segment of the market that we're talking about, in my opinion.
It feels like we're getting better at it. Just viewing what people are embracing in cafes and roasteries in terms of product launches and vertical integrated, products like, here's how you can get our coffee in this format or that format in this place, and maybe even learning how to operate super automatic espresso machines in their clients that have hotels or other places where they're never going to have a trained barista to the degree that a proud Mary might have or something like that, right? It kind of makes me wonder the practical step that somebody who has a cafe roastery and wants to invest into tapping into that demographic of people. I feel like the reason we don't do it is because we feel like we need to completely be a different company. So it feels completely foreign to us and scary because of that. What is an easy way to reach out to people that we may have been inadvertently pushing away because we've made what we do so inaccessible?
I mean, I think the first step is realizing that we've made things inaccessible. I mean, I've had friends kind of outside of specialty coffee tell me that it was really easy for them to get into craft beer, and they would go places and just be embraced by the community, even if they didn't know anything, and that they felt much less welcomed trying to immerse themselves in specialty coffee, and that they've had these unfortunate hospitality interactions in cafes, feel it made to feel like they don't know enough to be there. From an automation perspective, it's funny because you mentioned that some people, might feel negatively about it, but I'll go to these trade shows, and even within these really specialty oriented companies, I see a lot of compartmentalized automation. There's automated milk foam dispensers, and there's automated tampers, and there's espresso machines that communicate via Bluetooth to a grinder and tell them when they need to adjust the grind to keep the shots pulling right. And people get excited about these things, but it's as long as you don't put them all into one box. And then once it's consolidated into one piece of equipment, like now all of a sudden it's bad. So I think part of it is just us needing to kind of change our attitude. At the end of the day, a lot of cafes can better serve their customers in terms of hospitality, in terms of pricing value, and in terms of quality and consistency by leveraging these tools and technology. And I think that inherently leads to a more welcoming and a more accessible experience. From a quality perspective, sometimes it's relative. I said earlier, what somebody thinks is a good coffee is a good coffee. Like, is the coffee that you get at a C store going to rival what you get at a boutique cafe? Maybe not, but can you find a good coffee at C stores today? I think more than ever before, I would say yes. And I think that is in large part because of things like automation. I think it's less common to find a glass pot sitting on a hot plate just getting stale and burnt. We have fresh brewed, fresh ground bean to cup coffees available in tons of C stores now. You have self-service espresso and milk becoming more common. At the end of the day, I don't think every coffee needs to be a barista competition quality beverage. And I think that's kind of the ethos that a lot of cafes seem to operate on. And I think that's where it gets kind of gatekeepery and keeps these people out. So I think that by leveraging some of these tools at our disposal and just by taking on an attitude of greater desire for accessibility, I hear everybody say that they try to be so accessible and that their focus is hospitality. And at the end of the day, like sometimes I just don't see that. And so I think the first thing is just changing our own attitudes, and customers will certainly pick up on that.
You mentioned hospitality, and the reason why sometimes people would be put off to specialty is because of that. Well, it's kind of an insecurity that we have about what we're doing. So we project that as an overdeveloped sense of confidence. And this is 100% what it has to be, because if it's not, then I'm wrong and I can't be wrong. And so we take ourselves pretty seriously. And surely we all should do as good a job as we possibly can. One of the selling points for a lot of automation, and this is a question that I ask a lot of people in the automation space, is the idea that you will save in labor, save money in training, and all of these other things, which to me sounds like a proposition for less investment into hospitality rather than the opposite, which is, saying now you can take all of that time that you've saved and still use it, but use it a different way. The phrase I'm thinking of that comes up all the time is now your baristas will be freed up to do something. And we're not even sure what that thing is quite yet, or if people actually want baristas to do that thing. But talk a little bit about automation and how, like, tangibly it makes it more accessible, and to maybe operators accessibility, but also to the guest, to the customer, and how it increases the hospitality aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I've personally been to a lot of cafes where I get really good coffee, but I feel like I can't talk to anybody because they're running from the cash register to the espresso machine and they're staring at timers and scales. I do think that there is an added element of an opportunity to engage more with the customer as a result of automation. I see a lot of data that customers care more or desire more to receive more barista interaction in their experiences than they have previously. So it is something that customers want. I hear people say, well, if the operator is saving us money on labor, they're just going to take the money and run, and they're going to have less people per shift. And now that person is more in it. It's like you're always going to have at least one person because you have to have somebody operating the machine, whether it's a traditional machine or whether it's an automated machine. If that one person is freed up, to use your term, from having to stare at scales and timers the whole time, and they can literally push a button, they're still there in front of the customer until that drink is done being made. And so there's absolutely an opportunity to provide that better service. Maybe it's me being a little jaded. I think what it comes down to in that situation isn't whether the operator wants to offer that or whether the customer wants it, because I think they probably both do. I think it's whether the barista wants to. At the end of the day, that's why I encourage people to hire based on attitude over skill. And that is also easier to do when you have a higher degree of automation. You don't have to worry about if you're hiring a barista guild certified barista, or anything like that. I think at the end of the day, sometimes baristas feel better pushing the button twice instead of once. I don't know that I think most people are as accurate as they think they are either, though, and so I think that another major impact from the automation is consistency and being able to truly offer the same product every time. And now customers know what to expect. And I think that is elevating their experience as well. And I also, I hear people push back a lot that it removes the craft element. And I just don't really agree with that either, because at the end of the day, a machine doesn't have a palate. The human element still exists. It might just look different. I think as with most technological innovations, like it can be challenging at first for people to accept it. But I think if we fast forward 5 years and look back, we'll see a lot more super auto growth, even in the specialty sector over that time. To me, it's a really good thing. And I'm not saying that I think that there's not a space for barista driven cafes that have, equipment that does require more training and more focus on every beverage being made. I think there will always be a place for those, but I just think that the majority of cafes can benefit from automation. I mean, I travel a lot. I've been to some really high end cafes, and I, for some reason, can't learn my lesson. And I always buy the expensive geisha, and I've had enough pour overs and espressos of these flashy coffees that end up tasting like salt and sourness to know that most of the time I'm going to get a better drink off of the automated brewer that they might have. And there's automated pour over solutions. There's automated bean to cup. Like, automation exists for a reason, because it can be consistent to a higher degree than most people can. So while I think there's always going to be room for both, to me, it's exciting to see more of specialty coffee start to open up, if not outright embrace automation.
Okay, so maybe there's an iteration of automation where it exists in this like set it and forget it attitude historically. Maybe that's what we've seen in some cases where people are like, "Oh, the machine makes the coffee," and these folks, maybe it's an airport where somebody who's working the espresso machine, like just last week, was working the pretzel booth. And the people who are at the helm say, well, it should be fine because the equipment does what it does, but it lacks intentionality. But it feels like there is this molting process where the intentionality of specialty, if we could break down specialty to this idea of intentionality in the process in order to influence the product, it seems like there's a next level of integration of automation into a place where it's not just a set it and forget it perspective, but it's something a little bit more like what we do with our current equipment if we are really serious about serving our guests something that is of quality. Because we could probably have the same set it and forget it attitude we do towards traditional espresso machines. Don't change the grind, and it's only this blend, only, there's so many automatic things that we trust in already. So it seems like it's the user, but what's the new user of tech? What's the mindset that we need going forward in using something? It's like a super automatic espresso machine. If I opened a coffee shop and I said, I am a high-end specialty coffee shop and I'm serving all the same coffees I would as if I had a traditional espresso machine, except for it's on a super auto, what equals success in that environment without succumbing to some of the downfalls of just that set it and forget it mentality?
I think it's just caring about what you're doing and being passionate. And to your point, I think that applies whether you're using automated equipment or traditional equipment. At the end of the day, I think people are people, and people that are going to take the lazy way are going to take the lazy way, regardless of the equipment they have. I mean, I've been into cafes where I ask how the espresso is tasting today, and they tell me they haven't tasted it yet. Or I was in a cafe today, literally, where I asked what espresso they were pulling, and they had to dig the bag out from under the counter. And so a lot of the same challenges of that set it and forget it attitude definitely do apply to traditional equipment as well. In fact, I think I see it like a misapplication of traditional equipment probably way more frequently than I don't know what I would even think a misapplication of automated equipment would really be. At the end of the day, we have to be able to protect against that sort of attitude. And that's something that automated equipment can do. where traditional equipment can't. I'm not trying to have a sales plug, but I know like with our equipment that I work with at Franke, we have something called IQ Flow, and it manipulates flow rate in real time throughout an espresso extraction to maintain shot times, regardless of environmental factors or the age of the coffee or anything else like that. And I think most manufacturers have kind of their own version of that sort of solution. So it's like, do we encourage people to set it and forget it? And is that the intended way to use that equipment? Absolutely not. But can we do what is within our capabilities with technology to protect against that inevitable eventuality that somebody is going to do that somewhere? With automated equipment, we can, and with traditional equipment, that's more difficult. I mean, you're really at the mercy of the user. So, I think that's something that's pretty interesting to consider.
So would it be a fair characterization to say that your automation and super autos maybe specifically level out the valleys of quality and consistency to a more consistent, sort of acceptable level, but that maybe if you have intentionality with the way that you use it, you could actually have just as high highs with the equipment as you would with a traditional machine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had fantastic geisha shots off of super automatic equipment. I mean, I've experienced for myself that the quality can be there. At the end of the day, that somebody has to know what they're doing and has to care. And that applies regardless of what equipment you're dialing in on. But I think that you can offer an elevated experience with maybe less labor and less training. And I think that's advantageous. And as I said earlier, like, are there going to be barista champions opening cafes that aren't going to use automation? Like, sure, that's fine. But there's also just a vast majority of operators, in my opinion, that can benefit from utilizing a lot of these tools. And, I think that it would behoove a lot of people to just reconsider why they feel the way they do about a lot of these things. I mean, I kind of think back to when I kind of had experiences that changed my views on automation because definitely used to fall within that category of baristas that like I was really into what I was doing and how much I knew. And I still think that, that knowledge and experience benefits me in my work and being able to do things successfully with coffee. But I definitely have come to recognize the value to customers and to the market and to operators of being able to kind of level the playing field, maybe remove some of these potential struggles that we take on ourselves unnecessarily.
Okay. One thing that is evident is what you said earlier, which is that there is a human element that's always going to be there. Somebody has to know what they're doing. And the intentionality we bring will determine the potential of the equipment we purchase. At the same time, it will also mean that people who work on super automatic espresso machines, when they go to work potentially at another company, would either need to work in the similar environment, or there's going to be a bit of a learning curve to go use traditional espresso equipment, which probably is just going to be the same no matter if you're transferring from one cafe to another that has traditional in both. But the idea of transferable skill based on equipment alone, I mean, it seems like it would behoove people that they would develop their ability, their barista's abilities to taste and be intentional, to dial in a super auto, that they wouldn't give up that idea because that is a transferable skill where you don't have the manual equipment muscle memory that a barista who does work on traditional could just go from one shop to another and have a little bit more of a easy transition, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's going to be that learning curve at some point anyway. If you didn't have that job where you worked a super auto before that other job where maybe you end up in front of a manual machine, like, and that was your first job, you're going to have more of a learning curve than if you hadn't learned anything from working on that automated equipment. I think also different brands of traditional machines and different brands of manual grind, or not manual grinders, but of traditional grinders can be quite different in how they operate and how you use them to make good coffee. So I think that if you went from one shop that used traditional equipment to another, you could also find yourself with that same learning curve if they're using very different equipment. At the end of the day, I think, it's very valuable to understand how to taste coffee. And I think that applies whether the equipment is traditional or automated. And at the end of the day, we're here to serve customers. I think that if you learn about coffee, if you learn how to taste and dial in coffee, if you learn how to engage and interact with customers, you're going to find success. regardless of what kind of equipment the shop that you're working at is using. In terms of teams, and especially scaling, if you're going to have multiple units, it's probably still of more value to an operator from the automated perspective in my mind. But I don't really see that challenge being that much different than if you're going shop to shop. I mean, baristas often switch jobs pretty frequently. Eventually, you're going to know what you're doing and you're going to be able to kind of walk up to any kind of equipment and use it successfully. But I don't necessarily see that creating more hurdles in terms of learning. And I think, unfortunately, especially within specialty coffee, resources and budgets are limited, and a lot of companies don't offer really in-depth training anyway. And I think the people that really like go down the rabbit hole and end up learning a lot about what they're doing do it on their own. And there's a lot of great books and videos and blogs and podcasts like yours where people can learn this information. And I think those people are still going to do it, whether they work on automated equipment or not. I mean, I know a lot of people that work on automated equipment that know way more about coffee than I do. I know barista champions of countries that say that if they opened a cafe, they'd use super automated equipment. And so I don't think that experience or coffee aptitude is mutually exclusive to automated equipment.
Okay, good point. As we talk about the acceptance and maybe the slower but still progressive acceptance of automation and the acceptance of other products that we produce in roasteries that before maybe we wouldn't have seen ourselves do, bottled beverages and the like, especially the most on the nose example is always for me going to be forever, it's going to be the half gallons of vanilla lattes we sold during the pandemic. And we were not shy about it. We were in trench coats in the alley selling these things.
Absolutely. Or instant coffee. I mean, there's a lot of like pretty decent instant coffee out there right now. And I mean, go back 10 years and try and tell somebody that, in 10 years, there's going to be specialty grade instant coffee that doesn't suck. Like everybody would think you're crazy.
So, this race to see what coffee can do and how many more people we can impact with coffee. And then this comment about most people can't really differentiate point wise between coffees from 1 to 2 points difference than we would identify on a cupping table. Therefore, and it's the therefore that I want to explore a little bit here, because I feel like we have this reflex that says, no, we can't allow ourselves to be influenced by what a customer can't taste. We can taste it. So we always have to have a very high standard. And we worry that maybe the race to do all of this with coffee is a race to see how many just kind of acceptable versions of specialty coffee we can have versus exceptional versions. And I wonder what the balance is here. Is that really a race to get more people to drink more coffee that's acceptable? And how does excellence fit into the equation to kind of make this a balanced equation, or does it need to be?
I mean, I don't know that I think that it necessarily needs to be. I think that we can focus on where we can make the largest gains. If it's fine tuning that espresso from, 56 grams out to 58 grams out, and, you got a little bit more crispness to the tart cherry characteristic, like that's great. But then maybe your decaf espresso tastes like trash because none of your baristas care about it and they don't dial it in. Or maybe your batch coffee doesn't taste very good because nobody's as excited about that as they are the espresso. I mean, I think that we can focus on the areas that are really going to make the most impact to the most people. And then once we win those battles, then focus on those like tinier incremental gains. I mean, I've owned a cafe. I learned a lot of lessons along the way. I was in a conversation with somebody the other day where we were talking about, coffee shops as a business versus as an expensive hobby. And I think when I went into it, I was in that expensive hobby area. And over time, as I realized what was and wasn't actually resonating with my customers, what mattered most to them, what was selling the most, it really forced my hand in changing my perspective quite a bit there. And so when I have some conversations like with you right now and the question that you just asked, I have people that will come to me for advice sometimes, and they say, well, I think, man, you're just getting old and you don't understand specialty coffee anymore. And I'm like, I'm literally just trying to help you avoid making the mistakes that I did. So I'm in no way saying that I think that we should chase accessibility at the expense of excellence. I think that we should all strive for excellence, but I think that we should approach it just realistically and from a market driven perspective. I mean, not every shop needs to be a barista award winning shop, but I hope that there's always those shops because I love going to them. So I think it's just being realistic about what are your goals, who are you serving, what is the experience that they want, and then try to be excellent and then package it in the format that makes sense for them. I know when I used to train my staff, I was like, I want you to know everything there is to know about every coffee that you serve. I want you to know everything listed on the bag and beyond. And then I want you to be prepared to basically tell that to nobody, because most of the customers coming in the morning to get their coffee because they're sleepy and they're on their way to work probably don't care about the microclimate on the side of a volcano in Tenango, but some of them do. And the ones that do are going to do, they're going to tell you that they desire that information. They're going to engage with you in a way that makes that clear. And that's when your expertise and this excellence really comes out. And there's always going to be a place for excellence. And I think that can exist in a variety of formats, in a variety of segments. I think you can find good and bad coffee pretty much anywhere. I think you can find excellent coffee on an automated machine just as easily as you can on a traditional machine,
Nice. Well, it's a brave new world for sure.
to say the least.
Yeah, it is completely different than, when I got started in coffee and even when you got started in coffee. There's a lot of things that we need to manage ourselves, being chief among them, in how we approach using these tools. I especially enjoy hearing your perspective on the broad segments of people who do drink coffee on a regular basis and would call themselves coffee holics or coffee, whatever, aficionados, and how we do still have that desire to spurn them and to say, no, 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 but you need to change. And how now it feels like commercial is merging with specialty in a lot of ways. And I'm not sure if you agree with that, if it is or not. It does seem like the older that companies get, the more they're interested in the commercial side of things, maybe just because it's good business. But it does feel like we're merging and creating somewhat of a hybrid of these two segments that used to be at odds.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, I don't know if I'd use the word merge, but I think that for sure the lines are blurring. I think in a lot of ways, commercial is getting more specialty. And I think in a lot of ways, specialty is not getting more commercial, but certainly getting more mainstream. I mean, you can go to Target or Walmart or your local grocery store and see brands that I certainly wouldn't have expected to see on the shelves, or that used to be small single unit cafes with a roastery, and then they were a regional chain, and then now they're in the grocery store, now they're at Target. So I think that there's definitely a blurring of the lines. I think there's always going to be a place for different styles of service and different levels of quality, and I don't see that ever changing, even if the distance between them becomes less. Not everybody is going to be pleased with a commercial grade cup, and not everybody is going to taste the difference or care enough to invest in a 90 point or more cup. And I think that's fine. I think what's clear to me is that the average expectation is elevating. That's irrespective of segment and irrespective of service model. I don't think we'll ever see a completely homogenous industry from an experiential perspective, but I think that we'll continue to see commercial coffee and coffee at scale increase in quality. And then I think, that's going to incrementally boost specialty coffee to higher levels of quality as well. And it's going to open up the market for more consumers to make that leap. I mean, when I had my cafe, a lot of our customers just wandered in randomly one day, and they used to be a Starbucks customer. And then they tell us, well, now I like your coffee. And they come in and they're drinking vanilla lattes, and then they want to try a cortado. And then they're trying espresso. And I mean, people that get into it are going to continue to elevate the quality that they're expecting. And that is only possible when we make things accessible enough to guide them through that journey and allow them to convert and grow in their tastes.
Perfect. Well said. Yeah. Tim, this is fascinating stuff, and I'm excited for what the future holds. And I appreciate you laying out your perspective and insights into this whole market and way of raising the average. I love that. That is going to be so important, and I'm glad for the work you do. So appreciate you being on the show. Where can we stay in touch with you and what you do at Franke Systems?
At Franke, you can find us at us.franke.coffee. You can find me on LinkedIn by searching my name. I'm not huge into social media. You can find me on Instagram at Books and Banjos. And yeah, that's about it. I really appreciate you having me on today. It's a lot of fun. I love your show. I love this topic. So it's definitely an honor to be on here and get a chat with you about
Yeah, it's been fun to move it from the comments of your post to an actual podcast.
it. Absolutely. I always love it when you comment. You always push back a little bit and you keep my brain ticking. And I always find value in what you have to say. So I appreciate that as well.
Thanks, Tim. All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. It really is challenging. There is a part of our DNA, I think, almost in coffee, where we really want that craft human connection to the process. And that's always going to be there. And at the same time, I really love what Tim talked about. And it's challenging to me, where he said, we are all for technology when it comes in different forms and it's distributed across the bar. But when it's in one box, in one machine, we really tend to push against it. I have to personally wrestle with that. That's a challenging thought to me. And one that I think really speaks to this idea of what are we doing this for? And who is the user of this equipment? Intention and the ability to care for people and invest into people and use this stuff wisely is always there. And so if we are fearful of automation and convenience, maybe it says more about that we are afraid that we cannot bring our intentionality and artistry to those things. What I hear Tim saying here is that's not necessarily the case, and that it is got its place in the market where artistry may or may not be available to input into those things, but where we do have the ability to use technology with artistry, we can make some gains in the industry as well. So I hope that you got a lot out of this conversation. Be sure to follow Tim, Books and Banjos. That is his handle on Instagram. Also follow Franke Coffee Systems at Franke Coffee Systems on Instagram, as well as their website, franke.com. I know Tim had a conversation with a friend of the show, Lee Safar, on Map It Forward over the Daily Coffee Pro podcast. So maybe make your way over there as well and listen to Tim's interview with Lee. Doing great work there. Continue this conversation and see where it leads you. It's always great to challenge ourselves with these conversations. So thank you very much, Tim, for being here on the show and talking with us. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about today's episode, feel free to send me an email, chris@keystotheshop.com. And also, don't forget that's where you can reach out for one-on-one coaching and consultation through Keys to the Shop Consulting, and also to sign up for the Keyholder coaching groups launching in March of 2024. A new set of groups, really awesome time, and I hope we can include you in that. If you want to apply, send your email, chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our episode, everyone. I really appreciate all of you always supporting the show, listening. Don't forget to share the show online and also subscribe. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.